Okay, this is going to be my lecture for the Lunar Cycle Piitaiki'somm, the Eagle Moon. It's part of my Blackfoot Phenology series. And I'll apologize as usual in advance for any bizarre background noise you may hear, particularly bird calls. I'm at home as I'm recording this, and in my house there are several birds flying around inside at all times, so don't be surprised if you hear some magpie calls. Hopefully it won't interrupt too much. Now, the first thing to know about Piitaiki'somm is that this is the 5th winter lunar cycle. Most years. Now, most years have 12 lunar cycles, 7 in winter, 5 in summer. However, every 3rd or 4th year, we get a kind of a leap year effect. We have an additional 13th winter moon, or an additional 13th moon. It does come in winter, and when it comes before Piitaiki'somm. And that lunar cycle is called Piitaiki'somm, which means the deceptive moon. And it's deceptive because you don't always know whether or not it's happening. In order to know whether or not you're in a Piitaiki'somm, you really have to be paying attention to what's going on outside. And some of the things that I watch in particular are what we're going to talk about in this lecture. In this lecture, we'll go through all of the really typical stuff that I see going on in Piitaiki'somm. And if little or none of that is happening, you know you're in a Piitaiki'somm. Particularly if the eagles aren't mating, because that's why this lunar cycle is called Piitaiki'somm, because the eagles mate and start their nests. So too the great horned owls. It's not all raptors, but I watch those two species myself. Now, as we begin Piitaiki'somm, everything is usually still iced over, but we've been having some warmer periods. If the river's still iced over, yet there's not a whole lot of ice on the land. So things are starting to thaw out, but the waters are still very much iced. So too during, if it happens to be a Piitaiki'somm, it'll all start out the same way, iced over. This is the very little bit of opening on the South Pond spring at my site. The little bit that'll always stay open, but when it's closed this much, it means it's been very cold. So we're still in a very cold time as we enter this moon, even though we were having some periods of thaw. On the river, things are still very tight for the open water crags. But in the forest, as things begin to thaw above ground, there you start seeing some insect activity. And in particular, our attention may be called to the poplar borer beetle larvae. This is an old poplar log on the ground in the forest, and you'll see these trails, these series of trails in the wood. This is called a gallery, and it's a poplar borer beetle larva gallery. Now, the beetles larvae that would have been in a state of some form of hibernation, as we get warmer periods, we might have a warm 4 or 5 day stretch with above zero temperatures, those beetle larvae may become active, and they start getting attention from the birds. So you'll see logs with new chippings out of them, with new holes drilled into them by woodpeckers. And these particular holes are telltale that they're picking borer grubs out of these logs. I learned this initially myself from a hairy woodpecker, Piitaiki'somm. Notice it has the same Blackfoot name as the downy woodpecker, Piitaiki'somm. In the Blackfoot taxonomy, these two species aren't distinguished from one another, at least not to my knowledge. In any case, I was out in the forest one day during Piitaiki'somm, and I came across a hairy woodpecker drilling into a log, and I saw him pull out a big fat yellow grub. And so I watched him pull out a couple of more, and when he left, I decided to, and it is a he, by the way, but you can tell from the red markings. They're pretty much marked the same as a downy woodpecker, these hairies, but you can see he's got a little bit of a longer beak, and he's a tiny fragment of a bit of a larger bird in general. So when he left the log, I went with a knife and pried in to investigate myself, and what I found was this, which is a nice big fat poplar borer larva. Looks like a big maggot. Okay? This is about the size of it in my hand, and I tried it out. I ate it, and it tasted very sweet. It was a really nice sweet taste. Those woodpeckers aren't just eating them because, you know, they're the only food around. They taste really good, like a candy almost, that kind of sweet. Hey, my birds are starting to invade here and call for attention. Any case, these poplar borer larvae, basically the adult beetle lays an egg on the bark of the poplar tree, and this can affect poplar trees, cottonwood trees, of course, and aspen trees. So they lay an egg on the bark, and the tiny larva that's born from that egg drills its way into the tree a couple of inches. And then for the next 2 years, slowly eats its way out back to the edge of the cambium, the inner bark, and there it may transform into an adult. So by the time they get this fat, they're almost at the stage where they're ready to turn into an adult, and that's the stage where you want to harvest them. And so far, the only way that I have figured out to harvest them, if you want to eat them, is to look for evidence of recent drilling by the birds. And then, yeah, you can pry in, and you should find, right where the birds have been picking them, you should find more, because they're laid in bunches of eggs, and they all chew in at the same areas. So that's the poplar borer beetle larva. This is what it looks like when it's just at that edge of that cambium, and it's become an adult, and it's about to go out and have its adult form of its life and go through its mating cycle again. There's another grub that you'll find in these in these poplar logs that's very similar, and that is the flat-headed borer larva. Looks pretty alien, but tastes the same. tastes the same as the poplar borer. And these guys pretty much have the same kind of life cycle as well. They follow very much the same pattern as the poplar borers, just a different adult beetle, the flat-headed borer. And this is one that's just turned into an adult here at the edge of the cambium of the wood. Actually, this one I believe died in here because it hadn't come out to the edge quite far enough to be able to release. But yeah, all of these guys start to wake up when we have our warmer periods in Piitaiki'somm. And as you're digging into the logs, you'll probably find other things too, other kinds of larvae, other kinds of insects. This is a little beetle larva. What species, I don't know. It's another little beetle larva, I believe. You'll find hibernating flies in some of the logs, soil centipedes. These centipedes will be active just like the grubs as things are starting to warm up. And if you start turning the logs, you'll find other things. You might find Piitaiki'somm rove beetles, very active. You might find large rove beetles. Gray running crab spiders. Some of the first to kind of wake up for the season. Yellow running crab spiders, very common, very prolific. You should be seeing those at your sites if you're in Blackfoot territory. Granulated carabid beetles. So most of the time they are still kind of frozen when you turn logs over this time of year, but as soon as they're exposed to the sunlight, they warm and they become active. Epicorus thread-legged bugs, kind of an ambush bug. You'll find them. Sow bugs, busy transforming heavy metals from the soil. Believe it or not, we do have a firefly in Blackfoot territory. But it happens to be the only firefly that doesn't light up. So we never get to see the show. But it is still in that family or in that group. So Piitaiki'somm firefly larvae you might find when you're turning over logs. They look a lot like sow bugs, but as you can see, they are different. Sow bug, firefly larvae. On warm days, you should find meadow slugs. This is our only indigenous slug in Blackfoot territory. If you run into other slugs, they are species that are introduced recently. You may find the hairy caterpillars, these dagger moth larvae, under some of the logs. That's where they spend their winters. You'll most certainly find the seven-spotted lady beetles, our most prolific lady beetle. If we get a good warm stretch of about a week, you'll start seeing some of the baby grigs, the baby grasshoppers around. And if you watch the magpies, they'll be feasting on them. During those times, the thatching ants also come out and begin working on their hives, which are almost inevitably have been assaulted by flickers. So they begin the rebuild for the season. All ants in Blackfoot are called Eskokina. But this is the largest of our ants, the western thatching ant. from the ground, you'll begin to erupt brand new mullein rosettes, basal leaves. And this I was already seeing this year, because this year, as I'm recording this, we've had a Piitaiki'somm. In fact, we're just at the transition between the Piitaiki'somm and the Piitaiki'somm. And so, actually, this activity of the mullein coming out of the ground, I've already seen during the Piitaiki'somm, and the western thatching ants as well were active at least a couple of days. None of the other activity, though, have I noticed yet. Because the ground is thawing, we'll have landslides during Piitaiki'somm, so it's something just to keep mindful of. This is just an image from the Owlwood where a lot of the ice packed down on the trails from the winter movement of humans and animals through the area begins to thaw and create these ice cold puddles through the woods. And at some point in Piitaiki'somm, the river breaks, the ice breaks. We begin to have a lot more open water. Now things are really warming. A lot of times you'll see on the river the ice breaking up, creating these big areas where the icebergs are kind of piled on top of each other. Those icebergs are neat to look at. If you check the side of them, you can kind of see, you can look at the history of how the river gained and lost ice and melted and such through the winter. Pay attention to the magpies on the ice. And this is something that I did see happen already about halfway through the Piitaiki'somm this year. So this is not something that always occurs only in the Piitaiki'somm. Sometimes it'll occur earlier during our leap year. And this is the hatching of the Diamesine midge. We get these big kind of foamy things happening in the little patches of open water on the river, and this is really a big mating swarm. You see the old skins of larvae who have pupated and turned into the midge, and the midges are mating. It's all a big life cycle event going on. And the magpies love it. They're right on top of it. I would have never learned about it if I hadn't been watching the magpies. And this year, as I said, I saw them, both the magpies and the ravens, out on the ice picking up these midges during the Piitaiki'somm. You should also be seeing on the ice the Oak Apnea Stonefly. They begin to emerge, as well as the mid-sized diving beetles. The mid-sized diving beetles seem to have part of their cycle is that when the water opens, some of them at least will leave the water, will fly off and look for perhaps new situations, or maybe it's a mating thing. I don't know, but they do leave the water, and the magpies will be right on top of it, showing you what's happening. That I haven't seen yet this year. The opspiniques will be paired off now, back to their spouses, and they'll be starting to already lay claim to the areas where they're going to nest. You'll see the couples hanging out alone, even on the iced over areas, which is not typical behavior for them. There's no food out here. They're unprotected. What they're doing is they're starting to claim their nest areas. I also see this interesting behavior occur every year during Piitaiki'somm, and this is where the goose couples will go stand alone on the coulee rim, looking out over the river. Now I don't know if they're looking at if they're looking for a nesting site, like looking for where's a good island to nest. I don't know if they've already selected a nesting site on the river and island, and they're looking to see once the eggs have the goslings have hatched, where they're going to take them from there, because a lot of the places on the river are suited for nesting. The river islands are suited for nesting, but they're not suited at all for raising goslings. And so the geese always have to move from whatever area that they've nested on the river islands, take their goslings to an area that's more to their liking for raising them, and that's usually short grass areas. If they can use lawns like on golf courses, they'll go for that. Otherwise, they'll look for areas like at my site we have the wet meadows, which is a very short grass open meadows. These birds are designed through their evolution for the tundra, right? They're designed for short grass areas where they can see for long distances, and it's very uncomfortable for them to be places where they can't see long distances around them to make sure that the predators don't sneak up on them, right? Especially if they've got their goslings with them, they got to be able to see the predators coming, and so they're going to look for conditions where they can do that, where there's a lot of food and it's short grass. Yeah, so I don't know if that's what they're doing up here or what, but they do this behavior. They stand for sometimes an hour at a time up on the top of the coulee rim, looking out. For the most part, though, they're down on the ice looking for claiming their spots. You'll already start to see. Oh, this is on our high level bridge. They see the concrete anchors as islands in the river, so they end up making nests on those islands, on those pillars. You'll see a lot of squabbling between husbands and wives. You'll also see skirmishes going on already between the males, between the ganders, when couples come too close to one another and invade one another's invisible territorial line. This is just one of the couples yelling, kind of squabbling at each other. Out on the river, we still have our common mergansers who are here year-round, and we have our golden eyes who are here for just the winter. They'll still be around. The Blackfoot name for the common merganser is Mi'sa'a. Both of these waterfowl are fish eaters, divers. The eagles, of course, this moon is named after the eagles, Piitaiki'somm. Should be seeing a lot of eagle activity on the river, and you might even see them mating. That's where it happens. This is a juvenile bald eagle, Xikskinny. Xikskinny is the white head. So, juvenile bald eagle, which is often confused for a golden eagle, right? And even Audubon, when he was painting all of the birds, he confused a juvenile bald eagle, and he thought it was an entirely different species of eagle. He called this something like a sea eagle. But no, this is just how bald eagles look when they're young. You'll see white kind of flecking all under the wing, like this. Otherwise, kind of golden looking bird. Compare this to a golden eagle, which is really the generic word for eagle in Blackfoot, Piita. mostly refers to the golden eagle, but it extends across both species as well. There is a Blackfoot word for golden eagle itself, Piitaiki'somm, which means like a bronze head, I guess. But look at the way that the white under this eagle's wings is. It's very centralized, and there's always a part that is larger, that kind of from a distance looks like a spot, right? So that's the golden eagle compared to the bald eagle, right? Very different looking under the wings. Juveniles, and of course the tail feathers, you see the difference. The juvenile golden eagle with the white, black tipped. Juvenile bald eagle with all black. And this is how they look next to one another. You see the golden eagle on the left, the bald eagle on the right. As I said earlier, one of the things I look for is, along with the eagles mating, are the great horned owls, Piitaiki'somm, and whether or not they're mating and sitting their nests. They should start sitting their nests during Piitaiki'somm. However, this year, I just confirmed this week, the great horned owls are already sitting their nest here, and they have been for at least a week of Piitaiki'somm. So they've taken in a little bit early this year to their nesting. Or maybe it's right on time for them, but since I use it as a gauge to whether or not there's a Piitaiki'somm, it feels early to me this year. Magpies will start collecting sticks, building their nests, and or repairing previous nests. Magpies' nests are extremely complicated structures. They're orbs, and they've got large clay bowls in them, and those large clay bowls are lined with things like chokecherry stems, and it takes the magpies a good month to make a house from scratch, which is a really long time for the birds. I think it's the longest build of a nest by far for Alberta birds. But yeah, it takes them about a month. They will reuse nests year after year. They'll just fix them up and such. But during Piitaiki'somm, you should see them starting to do this activity. They're still quite a ways from laying eggs or sitting on their nests, but they will be repairing them and making them from scratch. In the forests and in the subdivisions, you'll see and hear the male Piitaiki'somm, the northern flickers. You'll see them doing their jousts. So they have a particular song that they sing, and they, people call it jousting, but it's more like they're doing a dance-off, like Zoolander. Yeah, they do a little dance, competing for nesting areas. Should start, as the thaw continues, the ice on the pond should start to open in areas along the shoreline, and I'll see activity of, evidence of beaver activities there. Even quite distant from the beaver lodge, you can see in the background of this photo, these beavers probably swam close to 100 meters underwater to get to this little opening where they've been eating bulrush stems and roots, like this. Okay. And if you go in the evening, you may just see them there. Richardson's ground squirrels, Omachkokata. Omachkokata means the big snare. And these animals are known most popularly as gophers, but they are a ground squirrel. They will come out during Piitaiki'somm. And I believe these first ones out are all males. It's the males that are waking up. And the males will kind of fight for access to the different female colonies. They'll fight with each other. A lot of them will be running across the road looking for new places, new colonies, and they tend to be killed on the road quite a bit this time of year, which the magpies don't mind. They're happy to clean up after that. This is some magpies at a mountain cottontail. Same way. If you see the white-tailed jackrabbits this time of year, you should start seeing their brown coming back into their fur like this. Okay? During the heart of winter, this animal's quite a bit more white. But as we come into the fifth moon, it starts to change again because there's less snow on the landscape for the most part. Should be seeing American tree sparrows. These guys stick around all winter, but you'll see them move into the coulees. For most of the winter, I think they go into the rural areas and subdivisions where they can easily access food. You won't see them in the coulees in the more wild areas until things start warming up. And they'll be out there pecking around. The American robins, the males, will begin returning. Their name is Oak Apnea, which means orange-breasted American robins. And you'll hear them singing in the mornings. House finches, who've been around all winter, will be again moving more into the coulees as food becomes more available, whereas they would have been up in the subdivisions and such wintering where there's access to food. We'll see the soyotak skanks, the killdeer, returning. And mallard ducks. This has already begun to happen here during the Piitaiki'somm that occurred this year. Last couple of weeks I've seen a lot more mallard presence. Also have heard different witnesses say that they've seen the snow geese already migrating north. The first, well, other than the mallard, I guess, the first migratory waterfowl that I see returning are these guys, the American widgeons. And they have not returned yet this year, so they're one of the indicators of a Piitaiki'somm still in my book. This is them. They're a dabbling duck. After the widgeons come in, if you're traveling along the prairies, you look at the prairie potholes, waters, you might see northern pintails returning. This is a male and female. And right toward the end of the lunar cycle, if the pintails are returning, then you're probably also going to be seeing ecological, the swans. And these ones in particular are Inishkai, the tundra swan. You'll see a little yellow teardrop by their eye. These are the tundra swans. So yeah, when the tundra swans come, then you know things are going to shift. In the next moon, you're going to have eggs. And then it's going to be time to open the beaver bundles. So whenever I see the tundra swans, I know we're about one lunar cycle away from doing our ceremony and feeding people waterfowl eggs. This year, part of my understanding that it was a Piitaiki'somm that we were in really came from engagement with the Gregorian calendar. Because if you know the Gregorian calendar, what date it is on the Gregorian calendar, then you know where you are in relation to the spring equinox. And it is the full moon after the spring equinox. That is always the full moon of Piitaiki'somm, the next lunar cycle we'll be going into. So this year I was able to tell that we were in the Piitaiki'somm from that as well, from just being aware of the Gregorian calendar and where that equinox was going to happen. I know that was too far out this year for it to have been for we to have been in Piitaiki'somm. I know we had to be in a Piitaiki'somm. And during those years that Piitaiki'somm occurs, it becomes the fifth winter moon. And the moon that would normally be the seventh winter moon, the frog moon, Magpies, the frog hops over into the summer and becomes the first summer moon. So you always have 7 winter moons, but you can have 5 to 6 summer moons depending on the year. Okay, so that's it for my notes on Piitaiki'somm, on what I see going on, and some conversation around Piitaiki'somm and what occurs there or doesn't occur. Again,